fast food restaurants, that was a direct result of policy. Direct result of people saying we're supporting Black people to have Black ownership in businesses. Julian Bond, Muhammad Ali, those are some, and a host of other athletes were entrepreneurs, Black entrepreneurs for fast food restaurants. And so when we think about what we have in terms of food swamps, that was a direct investment of infrastructural and economic investment that has led to Black businesses thriving, but also being very detrimental to community health and food access in the community.
So we're going from the Lopez effect in education to the McDowell's effect in the way that community has been impacted when you ask for something and then something was delivered and it wasn't quite what we needed.
Exactly.
Especially as we build sustainable, healthy communities for generations.
Exactly.
So taking all of that into account, I do have to let everyone in the broader audience know that we invited Jose Albino from the Griot Circle, one of our great friends and neighbors just near us at BRIC, that deals with intersectionality and specifically in providing community and support for our older LGBTQIA plus family members and citizens to come together and have an opportunity to fellowship and get healthy food and community. So Jose was scheduled to be here this evening, but at the last minute could not make it. And he was in the bad position of having to sort of make some counterpoints against Ray for how community investment should be plowed into a space of healthcare. And as we can see, these issues are tied together. As a matter of fact, on YouTube, Neil Feldman, who's watching, thank you, left a comment and said, these issues are interrelated. We must bring together decision makers, close the door, and not let them come out without a progressive solution to these never-ending problems, which is what we've done. So call your congressperson, Neil, and let them know that BRIC is on the case, and we've invited the smartest people we know into the room.
Right.
So,
just one quick thing. I mean, I'm so happy that, you know, someone was going to talk about healthcare. As you know, my position is to think about community health. Community health is directly related to food access, as evidenced by multiple studies. And then my last point was really to invest in social determinants of health priority areas and have, you know, look at the basic social determinants of health, redlining areas who have historically been redlined, areas that have high levels of gentrification. They all have very horrible health outcomes. And so to have those as high priority areas for investment in healthcare, food included.
So Ray, can you just draw the line for me for a second? Because some people are listening to you talk about these determinants and may not quite see how one thing links to the other, but this isn't theoretical. This is something that we know to be the case.
Yes, I would use the example of my old job at the health department. We would have these maps that we would work with, and it essentially will be overlays of different statistics. So it'll be like all the areas who have been historically redlined, right? And redlining is a government-sanctioned program that basically determined which community would have investment through loans and credit in order to own the property, and then that also extended into a lot of different things in terms of how communities would be invested in, period. Right. And so historically redlined communities are ones with the highest outcomes, negative health outcomes in terms of, you know, I don't necessarily like using obesity as something because that's sort of loaded in a lot of ways. But, you know, in terms of, you know, obesity premature death. Thanks. I'm trying to remember all my health department terminology. Anything that you think in terms of negative health outcomes, all of these communities have them. It's like really just like A equals B. Like it's the same communities, the same histories, and the same outcomes. And so, you know, when we talk about all the issues around healthcare and what makes good health, what
Yes.
makes good health is good housing. What makes good health is affordable housing. What makes good health is healthy access to good food. What makes good health is good access to quality education. What makes good health is, access to healthcare resources in the community, both public health and medical care, right? And so for the areas that have been dispossessed of those resources through government action, whether direct or indirect, we need to respond in a policy way, because policy created it, policy has to answer it. We have to respond with policy and investment in these high priority areas and create the better health for these communities.
Well, I can say anyone, it's clear that Ray Gomes is arguing both sides of the issue. She came at it from a food justice perspective, and she came at it from a purely healthcare perspective. And we're asking our panelists to meet in the middle. Again, we understand that it's an unfair conceit, but if we're looking at the hierarchy of need and also just the amount of resources that we humanly have in ourselves, if you've ever had to make the decision between going to the PTA meeting or going to the block club association or a community board and get dinner on the table or wash clothes, you know there's only so many hours in the day. So we understand that it's unfair. And a second ago, I misattributed that quote that I said was from Neil, but it was actually from a former BRIC colleague, Ted Canova. Thanks for writing in, Ted. So that being said, and knowing that Jose is not here, we do have a person on the street who's sharing their opinion of how they would make things happen if they were president with regards to healthcare. Have a look.
Hi, I'm Dr. Archer, a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I work in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And if I were president, everybody would get free mental health care. Everyone. From the youngest to the oldest.
Hi, my name is Dr. Arabella Croy Pembroke. I'm the principal of Riverdale Avenue Middle School. And if I were president, my priority for the first 100 days in office would be to offer free mental health services to every single citizen and undocumented person in the United States.
It to the panel. And it's a binary choice, but it's a non-binary world. We get that. Let me get the panel up right now with the poll. And the question is, what is the second plank of the Brooklyn platform with the full knowledge that we have there, looking at food justice issues or looking at healthcare? So we have a winner, and the winner is healthcare, which were two sides of the same coin. No one lost here. And even if they only thought of healthcare as what happens in the hospital, surely they know that the food is your medicine right now. So thank you for the impassioned arguments, Ray. Thank you for the votes from our panelists. Thank you for your comments that I see funneling in from folks all over Brooklyn. Hey to the folks at Collective Fair in Brownsville, who I got to spend a lot of time with this summer for the six-part series, Brownsville Rising, that's currently airing on BRIC TV, where we talked with the community about some community comorbidities that were in place and how Brownsville is rising to the challenge and rising above the expectations of those who don't know that Brownsville is going to be better than it was coming into this thing, going out of it. So thanks to the folks at Brownsville Collective Fair and the members of the community who welcomed us so robustly there. We really appreciate it and hope that you all will watch and learn as we delve into some issues in Brownsville. But our issue ahead of us right now, that is something that was paramount for a lot of folks in Brownsville, which some people see as Brooklyn and New York City's last frontier, as lots of plans are being made for that community. We're looking at housing, the whole housing landscape in Brooklyn. And we actually have a person who we met on the street, where if they were a single issue voter, housing would be theirs. Have a look.
I'm State Senator Brian Kavanaugh, and if I were president, I would ensure that every American has a right to decent, affordable housing by strengthening our fair housing laws and by providing adequate funding for public housing and for affordable housing throughout the country.
Affordable housing throughout the country was the last word that he left off on. And I know that affordable housing might be a third rail because affordable to who is how it starts. And then the question goes on from there. So Michelle De La Uz, you've already forgotten more about affordable housing development than most of us could hope to learn. So the floor is yours. Convince us as to why affordable housing and just housing period should be the last and wide policy plank as Brooklyn's caucus moves on.
Sure. Before I do that, I just want to, I think, conjure the spirit of former Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, the first major Black Party candidate for president. Since we're here talking about Brooklyn's platform for president, I think it's important to bring her spirit into the room. As part of talking about housing and the importance of it, right now people are holding on by a thread. The only reason why homelessness hasn't a tsunami of homelessness has not hit this city and this borough is because of the eviction moratoriums that we have in place locally and federally. We have, an estimate from a national organization that New York State has about 1 million renters that due to COVID alone will need $11 billion in rental assistance. Number of homeless families this evening hovers around 60,000 in the city of New York. Even before COVID hit, if you weren't homeless, you were rent burdened. You were paying well more than 30% of your income towards rent. And that obviously has only gotten worse as people have lost jobs. So people are holding on by a thread. And as Ray said, housing and housing stability and the quality of that housing is a major determinant of many different things in your life. It's a major determinant of whether or not you're healthy. It's a major determinant of whether or not you're stable enough to take part in education, right? It's a major determinant of how long it takes you to get to work and what access to jobs that you have, right? So it's a major issue that impacts New Yorkers, impacts Brooklynites, and quite honestly impacts folks throughout this country. This country has not done enough to make housing widely available to Americans overall. And there's a long history of systemic racism as it relates to housing in this country. Ray already brought up redlining. We've talked, you hear about the GI Bill and the fact that, who wasn't able to take advantage of that in order to build wealth. Those are all things that can be undone if we have the political will and set our minds to it in terms of the level of intention and the scale of investment that is needed. Solutions, first we need to recognize that housing is a human right. Housing is not just a commodity. Housing can't be the only way that people build wealth and have a foothold in being part of our society. And a lot of that is about writing the balance in terms of providing real rental assistance, investing in public housing, taking a look at that mortgage interest deduction and who does that benefit and who's not benefiting from that multi-billion-dollar tax break that we're giving to homeowners, most of whom are not Black and brown in this country. And of course, as the person said that spoke earlier from the street, to affirmatively further fair housing. We have a Fair Housing Act in this country, but we've never, ever affirmatively furthered fair housing. What we've done is when there's been actual discrimination that we're reactive. to the issues around housing and issues of discrimination. But the country's never actually affirmatively furthered fair housing. When President Obama put out a rule to affirmatively further fair housing, the first thing that President Trump did when he got into office was to basically say, we don't really need that. And Ben Carson has, repeatedly trying to take steps to undermine any affirmatively fair housing rules. New York City is doing more in that front. These are all things why housing is so critical. Housing is absolutely, part of the systemic reform and elevating housing as a human right. And what that means is part of the systemic reform that we as a country and as a society need to put forward to undo the systemic racism that we see every day in the lives of many, many people, and how, quite honestly, how this pandemic is also playing out. People who live in overcrowded conditions, it's not density that is driving COVID numbers, at least in a lot of the neighborhoods in New York City where there's higher infection rates. It's overcrowded housing conditions that are driving that. So I'll stop there and vote for housing.
All right, we like that last minute plug in there in the spirit of the vote. I do want to bring something. We're having a robust discussion over on the YouTube page, and Mo Beasley left a comment. How do we fight the engineers of systemic oppression? Historically, they undermine advancements of Black, brown, poor, working people. So Michelle, just a second ago, you spoke about how systematic racism has reared its head over and over again in the way that we look at housing, and it might bubble to the top when we're looking at overt discrimination on a case-by-case basis. But this is the Brooklyn panel. We got smart people in the room. We don't go to personality, we go to systems. So looking at those systems that are working to undermine people and propagate oppression, Mahogany Brown is taking the floor right now with the perspective about how we are going to look at systemic racism and make that a policy plank to make sure that Brooklyn for president means something meaningful and moving us forward from criminal justice all the way to housing, food, infrastructure, and education. Mahogany, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That was amazing. I'm voting for you, Michelle. Thank you. When I think of the things that we need to prioritize, especially considering the criminal justice and the pipeline for the for-profit prison industry, I believe we need to prioritize decarceration, reentry programs for those inmates that have been taken from their families and their communities, dismiss bail funds and return that money to the people, and defund police. Less money into the prisons and more money into community centers, education, houselessness, and food deserts. If we defund police, we can extend opportunities for mental health care. If we defund police, we can apply those funds to affordable housing units. If we defund police, we can eliminate Wi-Fi shortage for low-income families and provide free hardware and connectivity for our citizens in this borough. If we defund police, which I think it's a $6 billion law enforcement budget, just by half, we can afford community accountability programs that serve as liaisons that put the community members in spaces where they can speak for themselves. We can afford healthcare and assistance for essential workers. We can provide free food delivery for communities suffering from food deserts instead of the $1 billion that's already retracted. If we take 2 more of those billions, we can fund communities and people that are underserved and ignored. Defunding the police will also serve as a catalyst for humane training, community accountability, and the disintegration of a system designed to disregard Black and brown people. Redesigning the justice systems begins with sectors working closely with people. Abolish prisons, defund police, redistribute the money to the people that have been systematically abused by these systems of oppression. It isn't enough to condemn, stop, and frisk. We must eliminate the structures that put them there in place in the first place. So close Rikers, do not reform, shut it down. Release all those convicted with marijuana-related offenses and low crime offenses, and even those with these high level offenses, we need to start thinking, what do they need as a community, right? Someone said earlier about holistically, and it can't just be us looking at these metal steel bars and taking them from their families and thinking that that will do it. Prison has not worked. We have watched it. It doesn't work. It has tremors and effects. It impacts children and mothers for centuries. Like literally centuries. I lost my father to prison 30 years now. That is over half of my life. If I'm correct, there's almost 500,000 people, innocent people, that are imprisoned every day because they can't afford bail. So it is up to us to demand what our community needs, what we want to see happen. Decarcerate, release all the people and their children from detention centers, close Rikers, close ICE now.
Mahogany, I want to ask you what your working definition of defunding the police is. Because if I'm standing on one corner in one part of Brooklyn, I hear a narrative. If I'm standing on in another part of Brooklyn, I'm hearing a narrative. So give us your essence, beginning and end of what defunding the police is.
Again, they have a $6 billion budget, cut that in half, and then you start instilling that money and redistributing that money to people who can work in mental health care spaces, people who are already in the community, working with the community. There are accountability people that we have access to, but they don't have the actual, not say power, but agency. They don't have the agency to advocate for what we need. And so you have taught generations of folks to believe that the police are there here to protect and serve us. But what we're finding is the people that are here to protect and serve us are actually afraid of us. And because they're working from a space of fear, they also then work from a space of just, eliminate. They do not de-escalate, they eliminate. And so we need that money, cut that $6 billion in half and start redistributing to folks who have certification, who have a knowledge, who don't have a fear of the people that they are serving.
So you've heard two sides of a very not dissimilar coin. Once again, I'm going to ask you the ever unfair question right now. Please put the poll up, and folks at home who are watching along, who are still mad at me that I'm making it an either or proposition. I thought you would have relaxed by now, but you're going to be mad for about another half hour because I'm asking our folks to decide right now between housing or racism / criminal justice as the third and final policy plank as we march towards wrapping up this platform and Brooklyn for president in this first ever Brooklyn caucus. I'm being told in my ear that we're waiting for one more person to vote. So someone on our panel, Ray Gomes, it's a secret ballot. I'm not looking at you. So someone has pressed the button, and I can tell you with certainty that the final policy plank in the Brooklyn caucus is housing. So housing as a right, as a responsibility of the Republic has won.
Further it, we'll do it.
So at this point, I want to outline just what what the three policy planks of this whole endeavor are. We've got the most recent one, which was housing. Prior to housing, we had the policy plank of, help me out, Ro. We had housing, we've had healthcare, and we've also had education. So those are the three policy planks. So now I'd like to draw your attention to one more video. Have a look at this word on the street. Okay, so we have those three policy planks. Skip the video where I'm going to keep you in the room while it's hot. I have a surprise for you. With full respect to all of the intersectionality that is happening and all of the folks who are upset about these binary choices that we've been forced to make, but you know, it bees that way sometimes. I have the ability to bring something back from the sidelines and add a fourth plank to the policy. So can I please have the poll for the folks in the room? And I would love for everyone at home who is, or wherever you happen to be, to join me in saying right now. We have infrastructure in the economy versus, but not really versus. It's like versus versus Patty and Gladys in the room. It wasn't a versus. It was like a getting together. So when I say these things are versus, it's versus. So infrastructure that we're looking at, we have those three things. So I'm being told that it's a tie between the economy and the racism and criminal justice intersection. So those are the two things that are tied. Food insecurity fell by the wayside. And in the event of a tie, as there are 5 of you here, I get to do the Mike Pence of it all. Sorry for the reference. And be the tiebreaker. There's no flies in the room or on my head that I'm aware of, but I'm gonna get to make the decision. So if those of you who are watching and who've been yelling at me the whole time in the YouTube, you can let me know right now. I'm gonna take the first person and let them sway my vote. Because if I'm given a choice between, keep me honest, what is it, Ro? I'm looking at a difference between the economy and racism. I'm looking at something. Well, I got 1 vote for racism in the comments, and one of my favorite people in Brooklyn told me to choose the economy in the chat that I'm looking at here. So it's the economy. I had 3 voices for racism and for the economy. So
Wow.
our policy plank is secure. So it's going to be the economy.
I would just say that even when the economy's good, racism still rears its ugly head.
Somebody say that. So I'm going to invite all of you to unmute your microphones right now, since there are no more presentations, and let's dialogue about this platform that we've built. I'm getting folks who are Skyping in with me on YouTube, letting me know things that we've missed and what their thoughts of. In fact, I have one more video that I would like to share about someone who is going to be upset because the racism didn't quite make it into the final round. Can I share that video with the folks? Okay. All right. So we are just going to keep it moving here. So I'm going to ask each of you to weigh in right now. We've got a policy. We've got a policy that includes the economy. We've got a policy that includes moving forward with healthcare. So I want to know from you if there is anything we left out. These first among equals, is this going to be enough to bring Brooklyn forward as Brooklyn for president? Can we win on this platform? Nadia, I saw you sharing some support for points that Ray was bringing up, talking about how you've lived this intersection between education and food justice, and educating your young people and families, and working in collaboration with some great organizations in Brooklyn to bring food justice to your community.
Yeah, I think that what I stated in our internal chat on Zoom is that you can't have one without the other. And for me, like it's so hard to choose any of these things by itself, because we're all impacted by all of the issues that we've all represented this evening, which is why I figured out as an educator how to interweave these things. Because what we do see in the education system is that we tend to only focus on one particular thing without realizing that, you know, we are a microcosm of what's happening in the world. And if we fail to take time to address these issues, then we make one particular person, one particular class, one particular race more important than really looking at it from a humanities perspective. So, you know, as I listened to Mahogany share about all of the things as it related to racism and the criminal justice system, you know, my mantra has always been, I opened a school to close a prison. And, you know, Brownsville is one of those communities that adds to the 80% of the people, the residents who end up in our New York State prisons. And so that's based off of housing insecurities. That's based off of the fact that we have food insecurities. That's based off of the fact that our economy is not well in a community like Brownsville. People are not being taught trades, right? We focus so much on getting them to college, but our education system isn't reflective of the needs of our children. And so we've taken trade out of the school. We're a creative people, right? If we had things in place where we're not just saying to children, you have to wait until they go to high school to find out about coding. You have to go to high school to find out about things in the fashion industry. They could be learning things right now. Kids are quick learners, right? And so for me, that's why education is always that place. That we could connect all things, but there's a creative way that we can do that. And the reason why I take a stance with education, because even on a national platform, you hear that education is not even a priority. They don't talk about it. And when they do speak on it, they only talk about it from the perspective of school choice. And what that means is charter school choices or vouchers for private schools or independent schools. But at the end of the day, you don't give neighborhood choice. Because if those residents of those communities that are underserved and underprivileged had the choice of living somewhere else, they would go somewhere else. So instead of doing that, when we talk about, you know, defunding the police, I think that oftentimes, and I appreciate you asking Mahogany to explain it, because people take it as what's being said is to take all of the funding from the police. It is really saying it needs to be appropriately funded for, you know, yes, we need our police department, but what do we need them for? If someone is having a mental health crisis, you do not need to dispatch the police. What you need to do is get someone of the mental health care field who is licensed, who can help with that individual in a crisis, right? And so people get in their emotions and their feelings, and they're saying that people of color are asking, or those who are in a specific party are asking to end the careers of police officers. No, that what we're saying is essentially, let's reallocate funding. And if that makes you feel better, reallocate funding, refund education, refund healthcare, you know, refund mental health, refund housing. Let's use those words. If that makes you feel better, then let's refund the places that need to be funded.
So we're shifting ideas by languaging ourselves into a better understanding. So if defund the police makes you feel a kind of way, say refund housing, refund infrastructure, refund food justice. Mahogany spoke to us about the tune of $3 billion that would still leave a more than robust budget, in many people's opinions, for policing in the city. So I'm looking at you, Randy, Michelle, and Ray, saying, what would a $3 billion reinvestment in each of your respective fields yield? If you had $3 billion plowed into making more affordable housing stock, or creating better plans to sustain small businesses throughout this economic rough patch, or get people out of the cycle of emergency food into sustainable health and food, what would $3 billion look like in each of those lanes?
I just want to make a quick point too, because I feel like even though racism and economy didn't make it into the final, that those two things underpin a lot of these issues. We have food insecurity because of racism. We have food insecurity because of our inequitable distribution of resources through our economy.
You made moves, and a lot of people who said that, you know, the fundamentals of this U.S. economy were built on racism, and it was
based on slavery. Right.
Period.
Our economy was based on slavery. And so joining the racism with the economy, our food industry, our agricultural industry began really in earnest with slavery and with the dispossession of people from one land and bringing them here through violence. And so with the $3 billion, I mean, I can see so many community food sovereignty projects being maintained and funded. But, I definitely don't want to take policy out of this, because policy is such a huge, critical part of our lives that we don't necessarily give it a lot of energy and understanding. I could add food to basically every single part of this platform, particularly with education. If you knew that all of the subsidies that go to agricultural products are for corn, dairy, soy, and wheat. And those are the fillers in the food of highly processed food. And that is the most easily accessible and affordable food all around us, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would see how our policy is really created to have us have poor health outcomes, right? And so the education, when I was, responding to what Nadia was saying in terms of including food justice as a part of our education, it's not just telling young people that you need to eat more kale or you need to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. It's really having them understand how the system is really set up for them to not be successful, and how, being an activist and being, rebelling against the system, which teenagers love to do, is really a way of creating better health for yourself and for your community, right? So specialty foods, things like fresh fruits and vegetables, the things that we promote for people to eat more of, those things aren't subsidized, right? You did a wonderful piece on Brenda Duchesne out in Brownsville, who grows food for the community for, I guess it's like close to 20 years that she's been doing this work. $3 billion could help support the work that she's doing, could uplift the work that she's doing. I'm part of Central Brooklyn Food Co-op to start a food cooperative in Bed-Stuy in Central Brooklyn. There's efforts around starting a Central Brooklyn food hub, right? To recreate the food distribution system that benefits the community, that the community have access. And so not have profit be the bottom line, but community health be the bottom line, right? All of that money can go towards those efforts, because that will directly impact education and the understanding of the community. It will impact the food access, but it will also impact professional opportunities, economic opportunities for the community now and in the future.
So as we are looking at what we chose as our policy planks, I'm wondering, Randy, taking a look at how this comports with what the two major candidates that take up a lot of space are running on, what's at stake for Brooklyn, and how could the discrepancies between our policy planks and what they give a lot of energy to affect us really on the ground here?
Well, let me put it to you this way. The small business infrastructure or ecosystem is at stake, nothing less, right? We've never seen a crisis of this magnitude, and small businesses are disproportionately impacted by the shutdown. Look, if you have to roll up a gate every day at 5 a.m., right, versus, people who have the ability to work from their home in Westchester remotely, there's a very big difference there. If your purpose is to really serve your community and you have to see your customer base because they're there every day to access a product or service, right? That's the types of businesses that we're talking about. And I've done 25 commercial corridor tours since phase one reopening. I've been to Brownsville 3 times. We did Belmont, we did Pitkin, and we did the food distribution event with Borough President Adams. And I will say this, 3 things come up: grants, not loans, real rent relief for commercial tenants. And the third thing that has really come up is overzealous enforcement as a means to close the budget gap is not helpful to the small business community. And that's what they're facing right now. So, for $3 billion, right, we could solve 1 and 2, right? We can give grants, not loans, to small businesses, right? And we can help them with real rent relief on the commercial rent side, because commercial rent, 48% of which our small businesses are behind on, according to our survey, is the largest fixed cost for a small business, no matter where that small business is. So, these are the things that we could reinvest that funding on in order to shore up and frankly save our small business ecosystem throughout Brooklyn, which once again, to put it into scale, 63,000 businesses across all of the communities employing more than half of the New Yorkers, and all of which, or 84% of which have less than 10 employees. So that's the types of businesses that we're talking about.
So as everyone's mics are open right now, we know that you all have very particular levels of expertise and are known in certain fields. But as a part of this process, we asked you to come at us with some issues. So I would love to hear each of you share something that you prioritize outside of what we all know you for, because none of you stayed in so narrow a lane as to say, oh, Nadia, I'm only concerned with education. Michelle, I'm only concerned with housing. We know that you're multifaceted people who see all of the connections between all of these things, as we've repeatedly said this evening. So I'm asking one of you to unmute now, or all of you, and step out and share something that you think we should be prioritizing and holding our leaders accountable for right now as we continue this season of voting that's going to lead to a new mayor and a large part of the city council flipping and community boards and all of the things. How do we hold them accountable for something besides what we know you all best for?
Well, on the federal level, I would say immigration reform. We need immigration reform, and we need to look. We've done a full 180 under this administration in terms of immigration policy, if that was even possible, because we still hadn't passed immigration reform prior. We've closed our borders. We have come down hard on immigrants who are here. We have got no path to citizenship for people who have been productive citizens in this country for decades, and it's just ridiculous. And P.S., it hurts our economy. So just to tie it back to the economy, it totally undermined our economy. So, I would say immigration reform, real immigration reform, just immigration reform, a return to the policies of an open door in the United States are really something that should be on the federal platform. And so, please.
Does anyone else want to share an issue that folks might not immediately recognize as something that's in your wheelhouse? But I see you coming on, Michelle.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily in my wheelhouse, but I don't think we can underestimate how important it is for the federal government to come up with additional assistance for states, for municipalities and states. I mean, the only part of government that can print money is the federal government, right? Everybody is kind of like, why can't the governor do this, or why can't the mayor do that? Well, in the end, like that's a unique power that's at the federal level. And, the federal government exacerbated this pandemic. Like their incredibly poor response, right, has made it much worse, which is just prolonging the pain. And if we don't, provide a lifeline to states and municipalities, like all the things we just talked about are all going to be cut and go away, right? So it's like critically important that we like shore up the foundation, or else, everything's going to come crumbling down.
So Mahogany, in the spirit of flipping the entire narrative, you had a comment that you shared among us that I would love for you to bring to the front as we're standing in line to vote for a system that hasn't done a lot to respect a lot of us for a long time, but still, Mahogany.
Vote and I just said I prioritize continuing with the spirit of an anarchist jurisdiction. The fact that that's what they call New York City is hilarious, and why not? Let's keep up that good effort, folks. Sanctuary is one of our greatest attributions, and that is why there are so many naysayers for the New York state of mind. I love it.
So to that end, the world is watching New York, and by extension, we know that means Brooklyn. Whether we are the poster boy for someone who might go to use us as a battering ram to divide a country, or show an example of what this anarchist jurisdiction looks like, the great tire fire we've seen for the last 4 years. But I'm wondering how Brooklyn can lead by example. We had a comment on YouTube from one person that said, Brooklyn's greatest strength is that we can show the rest of the world how it can be done. So what thing can we show as a Brooklyn collective? We had housing, healthcare, education, and the economy emerge as the issues that we're about to walk through the door and present to our convention floor. But how can Brooklyn lead and show the rest of the world how it's done? Don't make me call Eric Adams back.
No. Go ahead, Nadia.
So I struggle with answering this question because as everyone was speaking, especially with the previous question, was like, but how are our elected officials right now showing up? Because at the end of the day, how we as a borough really can shine and be a model is based off of those who are in the position right now to shape the policies, to make sure funding is allocated appropriately, to protect those that they have been voted to serve. A lot of people give a lot of talk. A lot of people, when the timing is right and they want to be elected for a particular position, they take a stance. They're in every photo op. They're doing all that they need to do. But people are hurting, right? We're in a time when we need leadership. And so what you're finding is the community is becoming their own leaders. The community is speaking out. The community is marching. The community is demanding, right? But we're the people that were elected to take that stance. And so if Brooklyn is supposed to show up, the Brooklyn representatives need to show up. And, I folks know me, and I always say, I measure you by how you show up for my kids. And a lot of people haven't, right? They didn't show up for my scholars. And we created and we figured it out. But we can be that place because Brooklyn is always the thorough borough. That's what I've always said. And we show up and show out. And we take no shorts, right? And we're the land of kings and queens. And so the people who stand for us, who are supposed to represent us, need to show up and do their job.
So I would like to take it back to the summer that I spent socially distanced on the sidewalks of Brooklyn, running up and down into people from Brownsville to Bay Ridge, downtown Brooklyn, folks standing in line waiting to exercise their civil responsibility and right to vote. I had a simple question. I asked them, finish this statement for me. If I were president, and I'm going to put that to each of you in closing tonight. So Ray, you're over here in my box. I'm going to ask you to finish the statement. If I were president,
I would put people over profits.
Short and sweet.
Plain and simple.
I got a round of applause and 2 snaps in a circle. Michelle De La Uz. If I were president,
I would help our country have a reckoning with our history of systemic racism so we can actually move forward and go beyond it.
That reckoning. In the spirit of that anarchist energy that Mahogany was talking about. Principal Lopez, I need you to wax poetic on the subject of, if I were president. Unmuted.
I would shut it down. No, I would, I believe it's always people over profit, purpose over power, and understanding the power is supposed to be in the people. And stand firm and confronting our lives so that we can get to our truths. So that's where I would be at.
Mahogany, we were coming to you. Give us some of your thoughts while out. We've got some time here. If you could let us know what it would be like for an unbossed woman to occupy that highest office. If I were president.
If I were president, short and sweet, recenter, the struggle, the voice, and the story of the single mother.
I think we have the topic of our next town hall there, and all of the things that you all shared tonight. So thank you for all of the time that you spent with us. And Randy, we want to know what you would do. I didn't forget about you. I was just caught up in the steam of that recentering single mothers. That touched me in a way. Randy, if I were president, lay it out for us.
I would never hold to absolutes, because I learned that there's truth in every perspective. And the minute we close off our minds and our hearts to any other perspective, we are fully lost. So I know it's counter to what presidents usually do and say, or any elected official, but don't hold to absolutes, because there are really none in life.
I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the people who've been so robust in their comments on our YouTube page. I see all of you. Thank you for being such an involved and engaged members of the community, knowing that we're all suffering from little box fatigue. The way that you all have shown up and really kept the voice in the Be Heard series. You know, we do these town halls quarterly, and we're used to being together, and we will be together again. But we're shifting the way that we're doing things. We're not losing our connection. We're just maintaining our distance. So thank you for always keeping us honest and keeping your opinions going. We see you and we appreciate all of those things so much. So I want to thank all of the panelists for sharing their time and some of their quarantine hours with us. It's been an enlightening conversation, and we hope to continue it in those panels and on our stoops and in our text and finger typing. And before we get out of here, I just want to extend a debt of gratitude to everyone who put this together. And I'm going to ask them something that is unplanned and maybe a little unfair, depending on how you're feeling tonight. But if you are a member of the BRIC staff or supporting folks, I want you to turn on your camera right now so people can get a glimpse as to what it's like to put this thing together. You get to hear my big mouth, but people have made it all possible. There's so many more people, and they're all being shy right now. There's my producer, Ro Johnson, who was the 91-year-old grandmother who put her ballot in the mailbox. I'm looking at Stephen Arnold, who runs operations over here on our production team. Michael Carroll left his family to get into a room, and that's Eric Hazagag. Marcus Kearns is the voice who's been in my ear and switching all these things. Amanda Harrington has been in touch with all of our panelists and keeping me on track with research. Anna's not turning on her camera. You've seen Eddie and our other interpreter. Thank you so much to Eddie and Debbie for making sure that members of deaf community could be able to take place and take part in this robust conversation. Dave Feldman is somewhere out on the shore there showing us a picture. But this is just a small sample of all the people who were sit-ins and really helped to shape and craft this. The staff and team at BRIC TV and BRIC as an organization are phenomenal. And always, there's Dave, make us look so much better than we deserve to on this side of the camera. So thank you to my partner in all of this, Ro Johnson, for all these years of hard work and dedication that you've put into this. It's gone on too long, but I had to pour out into them all that they poured into me for so long. And Amanda, thank you for being so hardworking and dedicated. And I know I'm going on at length, but what some of you may not know is that I am leaving my full-time capacity at BRIC TV, and I'm going to be transitioning into another position at another fine organization, still doing the work. I've accepted a position with the folks at Consumer Reports, the national magazine, where I'm going to be the deputy of special projects there, focusing on marketplace inequities. So I'm still with you all. I'm going to be reporting and investigating the stories that impact our community and sharing them with the world. So I'll always be in touch. I hope you continue to be in touch with me. Thank you so much, Brooklyn. You are my home and my life and my community. I really appreciate everything you've done. Thank you, Jonathan Ortiz, popping in there now.
Hello, America. How you doing? My name is Marilyn Sanchez, and I am from Brownsville, Brooklyn, New York.
All right, good night, everyone.
11212.
Thank you so much.
If I was voted for president,
Good
I
night.
would follow the agenda of we the people, because that's what the Constitution says. We the people, not turning the W into a M and saying me the people.
If I was president, I would simply just say no capitalism and no college.
Hi, I'm Dave. I'm 45. I'm a dad. If I were president, I would tax the billionaires, give everyone free healthcare and free Wi-Fi, and I would make sure that it's a law that the Star Wars movies have to be good because they've been really disappointing. It's probably like an executive order. I don't have to go through Congress for that. So.
If I were president, I would unify the country. I think we're living in divisive times, and I think that it's imperative that Black people, white people, gay people, straight people come together so that way we can beat this pandemic, and I believe that would be my first mission, I guess, if I were president.
If I was president, the first thing I would do is get rid of Citizens United when you gotta take all the money out of politics. Number two, I would probably socialize medicine because healthcare is a right. I would remove the real estate industry because housing is a right. Those are the first things I would do if I was president.
If I were president, I would give everybody free housing and healthcare and food. If I were president, I would add several seats to the Supreme Court so that Republicans can stop blocking legislation that does just that.
If I were president, I would have free education and free healthcare for everybody.
The number one thing used to be climate change was number one on my agenda, but what I've realized through this election cycle is the number one thing to me is democracy. And so it has to be about giving everybody the right to vote easily. We talk about making a plan to vote. To be honest, that is bullshit. We should not have to make a plan to vote. Voting should be the simplest thing.
If I were president, one of the first things I would do in the first 100 days of office is try to dismantle some of the mistrust that the public has for institutions.
As president, I would end racism, social injustices, and social inequalities in healthcare, education, housing, income, immigration, sexism, LGBT, women's rights.
Hi, I am Ishla from Brooklyn. I am the best thing in the world. I'm an African American woman, Jamaican descent, and I'm from Brooklyn. If I was president of this country, I would address our babies, make sure that they're healthy, make sure they're safe, that they're well educated, because that's the future.
From New York, this is Democracy Now!
The most astonishing thing was when one of the justices asked the government lawyer, will you allow Abu Zubaydah to testify? It was a stunning question. And the answer was even more stunning. Well, he's being held in Guantanamo. And the justice said, why doesn't he file a habeas petition? Well, he has filed a habeas petition 14 years ago.
The torture cover-up continues. We'll look at Wednesday's Supreme Court oral arguments about Guantanamo prisoner Abu Zubaydah, who was waterboarded over 80 times at a secret CIA black site. The Biden administration argues key details about his torture are state secrets, including the role of two psychologists, Mitchell and Jessen, who designed the torture program. We'll get the latest. Then to Ethiopia.
CNN can reveal, based on documentary evidence and witnesses' accounts, Ethiopian Airlines has been transporting weapons between Ethiopia and Eritrea since the beginning of the war in Ethiopia that has seen thousands killed.
We'll speak to award-winning CNN reporter Naima Abaria about how Ethiopia used its flagship commercial airlines, Ethiopian Airlines, to transport weapons during the war in Tigray. But first, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the near-total ban on abortion in Texas. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Texas, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the state's near-total ban on abortions, granting the Justice Department's emergency request to halt the law while courts consider its legality. In his ruling, Judge Robert Pittman slammed the Texas ban's unconstitutionality, writing, quote, "This court will not sanction one more day of this offensive deprivation of such an important right." We'll have more on the story after headlines. On Capitol Hill, Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Wednesday he would allow an emergency extension of the federal debt limit that would put off the risk of a U.S. default until December. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says a vote is likely today. The World Health Organization's endorsed a first-of-its-kind vaccine against malaria for children in sub-Saharan Africa. The WHO said the vaccine proved to be safe and reduced severe malaria by 30% in children enrolled in a pilot program in Ghana, Kenya, and Malawi. WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus called the vaccine a major victory in the fight against one of the world's worst infectious diseases.
This long-awaited malaria vaccine is a breakthrough for science, child health, and malaria control. Using this vaccine in addition to existing tools to prevent malaria could save tens of thousands of young lives each year.
It's the first vaccine ever approved for use against a parasitic disease. Malaria claims the lives of about 500,000 people each year, half of whom are children in Africa. The United States reported more than 2,500 COVID-19 deaths Wednesday, even as new cases continue to fall from a summer peak. With the latest deaths, the U.S. has now recorded more COVID fatalities in 2021 than in all of 2020. The White House said Wednesday it would spend $1 billion to purchase at-home rapid antigen tests in response to an ongoing nationwide shortage. Los Angeles City Council has approved a measure requiring people entering indoor public spaces and large outdoor gatherings to provide proof of vaccination. In Colorado, the UC Health Hospital system says it will deny organ transplants to patients who refuse to get vaccinated for COVID-19. Most transplant centers already require patients to receive other vaccinations, like for hepatitis and measles, and routinely make organ recipients pledge to abstain from tobacco and alcohol. In Afghanistan, a UN agency will start paying to keep the country's fragile healthcare infrastructure afloat after the flow of international aid dollars, which the health sector relied on, dried up following the Taliban takeover in August. This includes paying the salaries of at least 25,000 health workers. Last month, the Biden administration granted special licenses to some organizations, including the UN, to engage in transactions with the Taliban, which is under U.S. sanctions. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation is becoming increasingly dire. This is Afghanistan Director of the World Food Programme, Mary Ellen McGroarty.
The 38 million Afghans who still live in the country are adjusting to a new reality. It is incredibly sad, and over the weeks, a humanitarian crisis has just escalated and magnified at an incredible pace. It's a crisis that has its roots in decades of conflict and the increasing pressures of climate change.
The United Nations Secretary General has appointed Staffan de Mistura of Italy as his personal envoy for Western Sahara. The appointment comes after the post went vacant for over 2 years. Morocco's occupied Western Sahara since 1975 in defiance of the United Nations and international law. Over the past 4 decades, thousands of Western Sahara's indigenous people, the Sahrawi, have been tortured, imprisoned, killed, and disappeared while resisting the Moroccan occupation. To see our exclusive documentary, 4 Days in Western Sahara, Africa's Last Colony, go to democracynow.org. Back in the United States, the Education Department is temporarily expanding student loan forgiveness for public service workers. The move is expected to benefit 550,000 people, including teachers, social workers, military members, and others who were previously not included in the public service loan forgiveness program. In Texas, a crude oil spill Wednesday at the Marathon Galveston Bay refinery near Houston is prompting even more calls to break free from fossil fuel dependence. This comes as Southern California confronts one of its worst ever oil spills from an underwater pipeline. Meanwhile, a recent study by the International Monetary Fund found the fossil fuel industry received subsidies of $11 million per minute, despite pledges by world leaders to fight the climate catastrophe. The Biden administration is restoring several key provisions to the National Environmental Policy Act related to the review process of infrastructure projects. The environmental and community safeguards were gutted last year under the Trump administration. A federal appeals court has blocked a California law banning private prisons, arguing it infringes on federal authority over immigration policy. The California law, which went into effect last year, bans new and renewed contracts with private prisons and phases out all private facilities by 2028, including immigration jails run on behalf of ICE. That's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The state of California says it'll appeal the latest ruling. A school shooting in Arlington, Texas Wednesday left 4 people injured. The suspect, an 18-year-old student, has been taken into custody. The attack sparked renewed calls to tighten Texas's gun laws. Last month, the state's permitless gun law went into effect, which allows people to carry firearms without a license as long as they have no priors with state or federal law. In Colorado, workers at 5 Amazon warehouses are seeking class action status for a lawsuit alleging the retail giant refused to pay them for time spent at employee-mandated COVID-19 screenings before the start of their shifts. The workers say beginning in March 2020, they routinely waited in long lines for up to 1 hour to answer questions about their symptoms and have their temperatures checked. More than 10,000 workers were affected. Under Colorado law, workers must be paid when they're required to be on their employer's premises or on duty. Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders is pushing back against Senator Joe Manchin after the West Virginia Democrat said he would oppose much of President Biden's $3.5 trillion 10-year budget reconciliation package known as the Build Back Better Act. Manchin told reporters last week he doesn't want to create a, quote, entitlement society. On Wednesday, Senator Sanders said U.S. working families should be entitled to child care, universal pre-K, affordable prescription drugs, dental and vision benefits, free community college, and a world free from catastrophic climate change. Sanders called on Manchin to make it clear which of these proposals he wants to cut.
The time is long overdue for him to tell us with specificity, not generalities, we're beyond generalities, with specificity, what he wants and what he does not want, and to explain that to the people of West Virginia and America.
This week, immigrants and their supporters began a 4-day round-the-clock sleep-out protest outside the Brooklyn home of Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer. They're demanding the Senate Majority Leader overrule the Senate parliamentarian and include immigration policy in the Build Back Better budget reconciliation package. This is Alejandra Marin, an undocumented essential worker member of the group New Immigrant Community Empowerment.
We need a change in the laws in this country. We need Congress, President Biden, Kamala, Schumer. We are here in front of your house asking for immigration reform for the 11 million undocumented. We are the backbone, the foundation of this economy. We deserve justice. We deserve equality. We deserve human respect as people, as human beings, as essential workers of this country. For that reason, I'm here with all of you today to fight for a just immigration reform for all immigrants and essential workers of this country.
And the 2021 Nobel Prize in Literature will be awarded to Tanzanian novelist Aburaza Garna. The Nobel Committee cited his, quote, uncompromising and compassionate penetration of the effects of colonialism and the fate of the refugee in the gulf between cultures and continents, unquote. Garna is the first Black African writer to win a Nobel Prize since Wole Soyinka in 1986. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Texas, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the state's near-total ban on abortions, granting the Justice Department's emergency request to halt the law while courts consider its legality. In his ruling, Judge Robert Pittman slammed the Texas ban's unconstitutionality, writing, quote, from the moment SBA went into effect, women have been unlawfully prevented from exercising control over their lives in ways that are protected by the Constitution. That other courts may find a way to avoid this conclusion is theirs to decide. This court will not sanction one more day of this offensive deprivation of such an important right. Judge Pittman also accused Texas lawmakers of, quote, pursuing an unprecedented and aggressive scheme to deprive its citizens of a significant and well-established constitutional right. We go now to Boston, where we're joined by Amy Littlefield, the abortion access correspondent at The Nation. Her recent article on Texas is headlined, "This is what the first hours of a near-total ban on abortion look like." Amy, first talk about the significance of this judge's ruling and what it will mean for Texas.
Well, Judge Robert Pittman, Amy, ruled and said what advocates in Texas and clinic operators in Texas have been saying all along, that Senate Bill 8, which was in effect a near total ban on abortion in the state of Texas, is flagrantly unconstitutional, that the attempt to sort of make an end run around the courts by using civil lawsuits to enforce this law was something that this judge could transparently see through, that this was about banning abortion, which is not allowed under the Constitution as, you know, it's currently interpreted by the courts. However, it's important to note that this is not the final word. And we also don't know exactly how clinics are going to put this ruling into practice. Senate Bill 8, which bans abortion after embryonic cardiac activity can be detected, which happens at between 5 and 7 weeks of pregnancy, which is 1 to 3 weeks after a missed period. Most clinics in the state had continued providing abortions up until cardiac activity. Planned Parenthood of South Texas, for example, actually stopped providing all abortions because they were afraid of getting sued under this law. So we don't know exactly how all of the different abortion providers in Texas are going to move after this ruling. But I know Whole Woman's Health, an independent clinic that has been out in front fighting Senate Bill 8 from the beginning, has said they're going to move as quickly as possible to start resuming abortions, even though the law has this sort of hidden, Russian nesting doll provision that actually allows, even though there's a preliminary injunction in place, it allows abortion providers and anyone who aids or abets in an abortion to be sued while the preliminary injunction is in place retroactively. In other words, if the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court puts this law back into place, anyone who violates it in the meantime, even though it's on hold, could still face a lawsuit. And again, for folks who haven't been following this, the civil lawsuit provision is what is so nefarious and what gave conservative justices cover to allow this law to go into effect. That is, that instead of being enforced by the state of Texas, this law is enforced by private citizens who can sue anyone who helps someone get an abortion for $10,000.
I mean, and just to elaborate on that for people to understand, it could be the taxi driver who brings a person to a women's health clinic to get an abortion. It could be the anti-abortion activist outside who takes down the license plate, finds out who that is, and sues for $10,000. It could be a person in another state who has nothing to do with this, who sues, for example, as happened, the Texas doctor who gave an abortion to a person.
It could be a disbarred attorney in another state under house arrest, who I believe was the first person to sue Dr. Alan Braid when he openly violated the law in Texas. So yes, I mean, that is the sort of bounty hunter provision of this. But I mean, the effect has been a near total ban, which is a lot less, creative and exciting and much more sort of transparently the goal of anti-abortion forces all along was to cut off access to abortion in Texas. And we saw this happen in the state previously last year during the pandemic, the sort of height of the pandemic in March and April of 2020. Governor Greg Abbott tried to ban abortion as a non-essential service. And just like Senate Bill 8, that measure wound its way through the courts. Access flipped off and on 8 times. You had clinic staff coming out into the waiting room telling patients who had been sitting there waiting for their procedures, sorry, we just heard that the court ruled against us and you're going to have to go home and we'll call you if we can see you again. You had this sort of back and forth going on. We could see that start to play out again in Texas because immediately this decision in favor of abortion rights has already been appealed to the Fifth Circuit. And of course, the end of the line is the Supreme Court. And I think one of the most significant things about this Texas law is that the Supreme Court showed their hand. They showed that they are ready to allow a near total ban on abortion to go into effect in a state where 1 in 10 women of reproductive age and an untold number of trans and non-binary people capable of getting pregnant live. And we've seen the, human rights consequences, the heartbreaking human rights consequences of that over the past month.
Finally, Amy, before we go, you wrote this piece in The Nation. This is what the first hours of a near total ban on abortion look like. And you talk about a woman named Anna. Can you end by telling us her story?
So, Amy, one thing I learned when I worked for you is always to try to end on a note of hope. And so over the weekend, I traveled to Washington, D.C. for the Rally for Abortion Justice. And this was hosted by the Women's March. The numbers were nowhere near what they were in 2017, during the inauguration of President Trump, when there were 500,000 people in D.C. and you practically couldn't move. There were about 20,000 people in D.C. There were another 660 rallies around the country for abortion rights taking place during this Texas emergency. But what I really saw emerge, even though the numbers were relatively small, is I saw a new generation of leaders who have been shaped by the cruelty of incrementalism, the cruelty of one law after another, after another, after another in states like Texas. And I saw a woman named Anna, who's now 21 years old, speak from the stage. She tried to get access to hormonal contraception in Texas the month that she turned 17, but she couldn't get it because, you may not know, Texas actually requires parental permission for teenagers to get abortion, not just abortion, but access to contraception. So she couldn't get birth control. She was having sex and a condom broke. And so she went to get emergency contraception, but the store wouldn't sell it to her, even though legally it's supposed to be available over the counter to people of all ages. And there are protections for anyone who wants to deny someone access to Plan B, under purported religious grounds. And so Anna couldn't get access to Plan B. When she tried to fight for her rights in the store, they threatened to call security on her. And by the time she finally got Plan B, she said, you know what, I think it's too late. And she took a pregnancy test every single day. When it turned up that she was pregnant, she immediately knew that she had to seek a judicial bypass procedure, because in Texas, you have to have a parent's permission to get an abortion if you're a minor. And because her parents lived overseas, she had to ask a judge for permission. She had to prove that she was a good student, prove that she was mature enough, capable of making a decision about an abortion. And from the stage, I heard her say, I'm not a baby-making machine. I should get to decide what I want to do. And I thought, this is the generation that has been radicalized, that has been moved, that has been shaped and forged in what one activist called the hell that is Texas right now. And this is the generation that's rising to power now that's going to lead us forward. And they use terminology and rallying cries that are so different from the 1990s when, you know, Roe was under threat in the Planned Parenthood v. Casey case. They talk about, you know what, it's okay to have an abortion after some hot sex just because you don't want to be pregnant. That is a far cry from the safe, legal, and rare calls that we heard in the 90s. They talk about pregnant people. They talk about trans and non-binary folks who have abortion. They are intersectional. They center Black women in their work. And this movement of young people of color like Anna is ready to lead. And it was really exciting to see it emerge in D.C.
Well, I want to thank you, Amy, for being with us. We will link to your piece at the March for Abortion Rights. A new generation of activists take center stage, as well as your piece. This is what the first hours of a near-total ban on abortion looks like. Amy Littlefield is the abortion access correspondent at The Nation and former Democracy Now! Producer. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, the torture cover-up continues. We'll look at Wednesday's Supreme Court oral arguments in a case brought by Guantanamo prisoner Abu Zubaydah, who was waterboarded over 80 times at a secret CIA black site. Stay with us.
لم يبق هنا أحد لم يسمع ضجته أبواق تنفخ في السور بكاء وعويل مقطوع وصهيل خيول شاردة في شارع أجيال تهبط أجيال تصعد في كل شروق وغروب.
Mirror of the Stone by Camelia Gibran. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We turn now to look at the Biden administration's attempts to keep secret information about the U.S. torture program following the September 11th attacks. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court heard a case brought by Abu Zubaydah, a Guantanamo prisoner who was waterboarded over 80 times while being held at a CIA black site. His legal team has spent years trying to obtain testimony from two psychologists, Drs. James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, who helped the CIA design and implement its torture program. The U.S. government's also trying to keep secret the location in Poland of the CIA black site where Abu Zubaydah was tortured. Wednesday's hearing took a surprising turn when several justices asked why the United States is refusing to allow Abu Zubaydah to testify himself in an ongoing inquiry in Poland. This is Justice Stephen Breyer questioning Abu Zubaydah's attorney, David Klein.
Why don't you ask Mr. Zubaydah? Why doesn't he testify? Why doesn't Mr. Zubaydah? He was there. Why doesn't he say, this is what happened? And they won't deny it. I mean, I don't think, if he's telling the truth.
You're talking about Mitchell or Jessen?
No, I'm not. I'm saying the person who was there was I don't know if he's your client. Isn't he your client? His name is on this thing.
Abu Zubaydah.
Yes.
Abu Zubaydah cannot testify.
Why not?
Because he is being held incommunicado. He has been held in Guantanamo.
Why? Just out of, I mean, I'm not sure this is relevant, but I mean, in Hamdi, we said you could hold people in Guantanamo. The words were, active combat operations against Taliban fighters apparently are going on in Afghanistan. Well, they're not anymore. Why is he there?
That's a question to put to the government. We don't know the answer.
I mean, have you filed a habeas or something? Get him out?
There's been a habeas proceeding pending in D.C. for the last 14 years. There's been no action.
They don't decide it?
I'm sorry?
I mean, you just let it sit there. All right, no, I guess this is not relevant, but I'm just curious.
Personally, I'm not handling that proceeding, but no, my understanding is that we've done everything we could to move it forward, but it simply has not moved forward.
That's an excerpt from the oral arguments in the Supreme Court case United States versus Zubaydah. We're joined now by two guests. Ray Bonner is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. He's producing a documentary with Alex Gibney about Abu Zubaydah and the CIA's interrogation program called The Forever Prisoner. His latest article for ProPublica is, will the United States officially acknowledge that it had a secret torture site in Poland? Also with us, Joe Margulies, an attorney for Abu Zubaydah, professor of law and government at Cornell University. He was counsel of record in the landmark Guantanamo case, Rasul versus Bush. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Joe, let's begin with you. You're part of the legal team. The case argued before the Supreme Court. Talk about the significance of the oral arguments yesterday. And when you use words like habeas corpus, explain exactly what that means.
Of course. Thanks. Sure, it was an extraordinary argument in several respects. The narrow question is whether we can secure the testimony of James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen for use by the Polish prosecutors in their investigation into whether crimes were committed in Poland at the black site there. But the more important turn that the oral argument took is several things. One, virtually every justice on the court described Abu Zubaydah's treatment as torture. They used that word. There were no euphemisms. There was no equivocation. Everyone understood that what happened to him was torture. Second was the observation that you made, which is the questions by Justice Breyer, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Sotomayor asking, why is it that you can't just let Abu Zubaydah testify? That obviously would obviate the need for Mitchell and Jessen's testimony. And what was as interesting as their request that Abu Zubaydah be allowed to testify was the government's equivocation and inability to answer that. They were asked, that is, the Solicitor General was asked to provide a follow-up statement, so they'll be filing something else, explaining whether they're going to allow Abu Zubaydah to testify. And if they do, that will be a sea change at Guantanamo. That will be a radical change. Guantanamo was built to be an isolation chamber, and they have never allowed any detainee to have uncensored access to the outside. The whole purpose of it was to prevent that kind of communication. So if that changes, that will be a radical thing. And the third piece that was really interesting was Justice Breyer's observation, which we have been arguing on Abu Zubaydah's behalf for some time, as well as other detainees have made this argument, that there are no hostilities left in Afghanistan. The legal justification for continuing to hold guys has disappeared. We've been making that argument, and yesterday we heard a Supreme Court justice accept it as though it were commonplace. How could anyone think otherwise? Well, of course, that's what we've been saying for some time.
As you speak, we're showing for our web and television audience around the world the artwork of Abu Zubaydah in Guantanamo. Raymond Bonner, it's great to have you with us. Can you talk about the story of Abu Zubaydah? Tell us who he is. You're doing a documentary, The Forever Prisoner, on him.
Yes, he was the first terrorist suspect captured after 9/11. He was captured seized in Pakistan in a joint CIA, FBI, to some extent Pakistani police operation. And he was rendered, he's the first captured, he was the first taken to a secret prison. I mean, I've interviewed both the CIA, the head of the CIA operation and the FBI operation at the time, and Zubaydah was taken, the first to be rendered to a secret site. He was taken to Thailand, and soon after he got there is when James Mitchell and then Bruce Jessen showed up and began the interrogation. And as Joe just pointed out, it was very interesting yesterday in the argument to hear, and Justice Barrett included, talking straight about torture. What happened to Zubaydah was torture. There was none of this euphemisms like EITs, enhanced interrogation techniques. And he was the guinea pig in a way. This is where Mitchell designed the program and tested the program of torture. Amy, it's always struck me that a lot is made of the 83 times he was waterboarded. If you read what was done to him, read in the government cables that were sent at the time. I mean, to me, the waterboarding was almost benign. I mean, they kept him sleepless. They put him in a small coffin-sized box for hours overnight. He couldn't move. They hung him by the cell bars and with his feet dangling off the ground. I mean, it got to the point it was so bad that Mitchell would just snap his fingers and Zubaydah would get onto the waterboard. I mean, what they did to him was far worse, in my view, than waterboarding. And then when journalists started to get onto the story about a secret prison, and you got to remember this was back in 2002, and we didn't know about secret prisons and black sites. And when they found out about it and started to ask questions, then the CIA moved them to Poland, and quietly, of course, secretly, and which leads to the case, as Joe has described, that's in the Supreme Court, that was heard in the Supreme Court yesterday. But if I could say one more thing about yesterday's argument, in addition to the 3 points Joe raised, I was gobsmacked when they started asking the lawyers about Zubaydah's habeas petition. 14 years ago, Justice Roberts asked about it too. Well, hasn't he filed a habeas petition? Yes, he has. 14 years ago. And Joe Margulis was his lawyer then. 14 years, and the court has yet to rule on his habeas petition. And it's unprecedented. It's always dangerous to say because somebody will find a case that's taken longer than 14 years. But it's just staggering that for 14 years, we've had two judges have now had the case in the D.C. District Court, the federal court in Washington, D.C., and they've yet to rule. You know why? The cables are there. Because in 2002, Mitchell and the CIA interrogators in Thailand sent a cable to Washington saying, we're about to do these EITs, the torture of this guy. He might die, they said. He might die. And if he does, we're going to cremate him. And if he doesn't, we want assurances that he will never be in a position to tell his story. And Langley cabled back, you have the assurances of everyone here that he will be held incommunicado for the remainder of his life. And that is exactly what is happening. We're never going to hear from Abu Zubaydah. I would be stunned if he's allowed to testify.
But you were stunned yesterday. And just to finish up that part of the story that you've written so extensively about these partially declassified cables that show, they said, if he dies, they'll cremate him. But you write, if he survived questioning, Gina Haspel, who became CIA director under Trump, sought assurances that, quote, the subject will remain in isolation and incommunicado for the remainder of his life.
Exactly. I'm not sure it was Gina Haspel, Amy. We don't know who exactly signed the cable at that time, because they've been redacted to a degree that we don't know who the signatories are. We just know the language of it, and they're quite revealing. And they certainly probably came from the Alex Station, as you know, which was the group at the CIA that was trying to find Osama bin Laden. Joe may know who sent those cables.
So, Joe, if you could tell us that, and also tell us about the significance of the CIA black site in Poland. Now, let's remember, it's the Biden administration that's fighting to keep all of this secret. The Biden administration.
Yes, that's right. Our litigation began during the Trump administration, and the Trump administration sought the review in the United States Supreme Court. And there was the passing of the baton between Trump and Biden while the case was pending, and the Biden administration picked up the Trump administration's argument and doubled down on it. So there's no window, there's no air between the two administrations. What Ray describes is exactly right, but what he's describing is the torture that took place in Thailand, which was the first black site. Abu Zubaydah was the first person thrown into a black site, the first person to have his interrogation, quote, enhanced. And we know a fair amount about what happened to him at Thailand. But we don't know what happened to him in Poland. We know that in testimony, James Mitchell described it, just said that Abu Zubaydah was treated very shabbily. But he uses those kind of euphemisms for the most grotesque torture. And that's all he says. But no one has ever questioned him about what went on in Poland. The Polish prosecutor knows where the site was. He knows when it operated. But inside the cell, he doesn't know. There were only 3 people there. It was Abu Zubaydah, James Mitchell, and Bruce Jessen. And they won't let Abu Zubaydah testify. So if we're going to get at what happened there, we have to get it from James Mitchell and Bruce Jessen, who, I should say, are perfectly willing to provide this testimony. When we sought their testimony in this case, they said, we have no objection. We're happy to tell you. We're happy to sit down for a deposition. It was the United States government that intervened and said, no, their testimony is a state secret and you can't have any of it. The other thing I would want to observe, it's important to remember this. Even Mitchell and Jessen, when they were torturing him in Thailand, after 6 days of virtually 24-hour-a-day torture, they decided that they were done, that they had emptied the content of his head, and they had concluded that they had gotten all the information they needed from him, or all the information he had to give. And they cabled that to CIA headquarters in Langley. And Mitchell believes it was Jose Rodriguez who cabled back, someone in the Alex Station, who, in James Mitchell's words, you guys are a bunch of pussies. You got to continue this. Blood is going to be on your hands if there's another attack. Keep torturing him. And so they did for another 2 weeks. And what they eventually concluded is that Abu Zubaydah was telling the truth all along. And contrary to what they believed when they started torturing him, he was not a member of al-Qaeda. He had no involvement with the planning for 9/11. He's never been a member of al-Qaeda. He is ideologically opposed to al-Qaeda, which is what he had been saying. And they eventually concluded that that was true.
And Joe, finally on this, you have met Abu Zubaydah. Can you talk about what condition he is in today after all of this time, held for so many years, the last number of years, 15 years in Guantanamo?
No, actually, I can't, because his condition and my observation of it is classified. Everything he tells me, this is why the government's, or rather the court's question is so comical. Everything he tells me and everything I learn from him is classified at the highest level. It's top secret. So if he says to me, for instance, I'm having terrible headaches and I vomit every morning, I can't relay that to you. I can't say this is what he says. I can only write it down and then submit it to the CIA for declassification. And we have submitted over 100 pages of Abu Zubaydah's statements and recounting of what happened to him. Excuse me. And that's been submitted for years, and the CIA has never cleared it. Many years ago, they authorized me to say that I am very concerned about his welfare. Very concerned or gravely concerned, some adverb like that. And I can tell you that nothing has changed between then and now. I remain very concerned. But that's all I'm allowed to say.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us. Joe Margulies, attorney for Abu Zubaydah, and Raymond Bonner, investigative journalist, producing a documentary with Alex Gibney about Abu Zubaydah and the CIA's interrogation program called The Forever Prisoner. We'll link to your piece in ProPublica. Will the United States officially acknowledge that it had a secret torture site in Poland? Coming up, we'll speak to the award-winning CNN reporter Naima Abagir about how Ethiopia used its flagship commercial airline, Ethiopian Airlines, to transport weapons during the war in Tigray. Stay with us.
ለሰው ልጆች ፍቅር ለሰው ልጆች ሰላም ለሰው ልጆች በዓለም ዙሪያ ሁሉ ሰላም ይሁን ምድሩ ሁሉ ሰላም 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 በዓለም ዙሪያ ሁሉ ለሰው ዘር በሙሉ
Salam, Peace by Mahmoud Ahmed. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We turn now to the mounting humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia amid civil war and famine. It's been nearly a year since the Ethiopian government launched an offensive against Tigray separatists, and the United Nations estimates more than 5 million people in the country's Tigray region are now in need of humanitarian assistance in order to survive. But UN officials say Ethiopia's government is blocking the movement of medicine, food, and fuel into Tigray. In response, Ethiopian officials expelled 7 senior UN officials from Ethiopia last week, giving them just 72 hours to leave the country. The UN Security Council held an emergency meeting Wednesday to discuss the crisis in Ethiopia, where UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres pushed back on the expulsion and called for Ethiopian officials to grant unhindered aid access. Ethiopia's UN ambassador, Tayatska Selassie, pushed back in an extraordinary exchange. This is Guterres.
All efforts should be squarely focused on saving lives and avoiding a massive human tragedy. This makes last Thursday's announcement by the government of Ethiopia to expel 7 senior UN officials, most of them humanitarian staff, particularly disturbing.
Expulsion was not our primary course of action. In multiple occasions, we explained our concern to UN officials. On July 8, 2021, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister of Ethiopia wrote a letter to the UN Secretariat explaining in great details the misconducts of the UN staff that require corrective measures.
If there is any written document provided by the Ethiopian government to any UN institution about any of the 8 members of the UN that were expelled, I would like to receive a copy of that document because I have not had any knowledge of any of them.
So that's the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres having a back and forth with Ethiopia's ambassador to the United Nations. This comes as the Ethiopian Prime Minister, the Nobel laureate Abiy Ahmed, was sworn in on Monday for a second term, even as he's come under fire for his handling of the conflict. On Wednesday, CNN reported Ethiopia's government has used the country's flagship commercial airline to shuttle weapons to and from neighboring Eritrea during the civil war. This is part of the investigation by CNN's Naima Abagir.
Ethiopian Airlines is Africa's premier carrier of passenger and freight traffic. But among the regular cargo, evidence of sinister shipments. CNN can reveal, based on documentary evidence and witnesses' accounts, Ethiopian Airlines has been transporting weapons between Ethiopia and Eritrea since the beginning of the war in Ethiopia that has seen thousands killed. According to aviation experts, this would constitute a violation of aviation law. Among the evidence are these stills that were taken on board Ethiopian Airlines flight ET3313 and verified by CNN. It's the middle of the night. This cargo plane is being loaded by hand, a slow and unorthodox method. But look closer. This isn't usual cargo. Inside these boxes are mortars. They are being loaded onto this civilian aircraft and transported from Eritrea to Ethiopia. Here is the cargo manifest, corroborating the day and time, November 8th, 2020. The date is significant. It's just 4 days into the conflict and months before Eritrea officially admits to being involved.
That's part of the new CNN investigation by Nema Bahir called Ethiopia Used Its Flagship Commercial Airline to Transport Weapons During War in Tigray. She's an award-winning senior international correspondent for CNN. For more, she's joining us from London. Nema, welcome back to Democracy Now! This is explosive, about the explosives that the Ethiopian government was transporting. Can you lay out the significance of this and also then the response of the Ethiopian government?
Well, it goes to the heart of the narrative that Ethiopia and Eritrea have been positing right from the beginning of this conflict, that the Tigray People's Liberation Front attacked Ethiopia in their northern command, which they did. But the TPLF have always said they attacked Ethiopia because there was a joint Ethiopian-Eritrean plan to attack them, to finish them, as was put at the time. Now, Ethiopia and Eritrea have always denied that. They say November 4th, they were blindsided. They needed to launch this law enforcement operation. November 14th, the TPLF rocketed Asmara, and that was when the two former enemies turned allies came together. What we found, it untangles, it dissolves all of that narrative, because we found right from the first week of November that these flights were going back and forth, gun running between the two allies. So even before the TPLF hit Asmara, they were already planning on attacking Tigray, and Eritrea needed this weaponry to be able to come down from the north into Tigray. This narrative that somehow the Ethiopian government was caught unawares begins to crumble. Then you also have the reality of how Ethiopian Airlines has built itself up into the name that it is today, which is through its relationship, through its decades-long alliance with the U.S. and with American aviation giant Boeing. So it is taxpayer, U.S.-funded, favorable access to U.S. markets worth hundreds of millions of dollars that has built that fleet that is now being used as an apparatus of war and to bring weaponry into a region where, by the U.S. government's own findings, ethnic cleansing is happening as we speak, Amy.
And for people who aren't familiar with the conflict, who have heard of the Ethiopian-Eritrean conflict, that being resolved, how Tigray fits into all of this?
Tigray was the region from which the senior partners in the coalition that ruled Ethiopia for almost 30 years came from. The TPLF, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, they held the presidency under Meles Zenawi and his successor before the demonstrations that installed Nobel laureate Abiy Ahmed, who himself was a part of the TPLF-led government, led coalition. So you can say that what this is an existential conflict over power, over Abiy Ahmed and his allies in neighboring Eritrea, centralizing rule and taking it back from the TPLF, who were elected to govern Tigray even after Abiy Ahmed came into power. But beyond that, more importantly, and I think often when we have these conversations about how complicated this conflict is, we allow the reality to be obscured. What this is a targeting of innocent civilians who share the same ethnicity as the former rulers of Ethiopia in Tigray. It is a minority which has disproportionately ruled Ethiopia, but it is still a minority that has almost 6 million innocent civilians in and around those who are now part of this conflict. And it's those civilians that the Ethiopian government and its allies in the regional ethnic Amhara forces are targeting and are starving.
I want to ask you about Facebook's involvement. It was raised in the Senate hearings yesterday. But first, I want to go to your stunning investigation for CNN documenting ethnic cleansing in Ethiopia. Headlined, "Men are marched out of prison camps, then corpses float down the river." We're going to play the full report now, courtesy of CNN. A warning to our listeners and viewers, the report includes graphic descriptions and images.
This is the Sitit River, a source of life for the people living along its banks. For weeks, the river has been bringing with it dark secrets from the Ethiopian region of Tigray. Mangled corpses are mysteriously appearing here, downstream in Sudan.
We just got a call that 3 bodies were found down at the riverfront, so we're running down to see what we can see.
Garry rushes down ahead of us. He's Tigrayan, but has been living here for years. He's a key point of contact for Tigrayans driven to Sudan by the conflict. Fishermen usually spot them first and call Garry. On both sides of the border, Tigrayans keep a grim tally of those believed to have been executed by Ethiopian forces that somehow end up in the river. This is an awful job, but one Tigrayans say is their duty. We reached the first body on this small island. We must warn you, the images you're about to see are very disturbing. From the binds still biting into his skin, it's clear this man suffered a tortured death. This Tigrayan has been helping to recover the dead. He holds up the body, but the image is too gruesome to show you. His eyes, though, betray the horror in front of him.
They pulled the body out and the stench was immediate. It clearly had been decomposing along the river for a number of days, and he was tied back with a plastic wire, clearly restrained, and part of the skull was collapsed in. It's just a horrible, horrible sight.
They move to pick up someone else. Garry makes notes of the bodies and their markings. He's trying to piece together this mystery for his people. He doesn't trust anyone to do it for them. Among the flotsam, another body.
His legs were amputated.
Sudanese authorities take photographs as evidence. This is a crime scene, but the potential perpetrators are far from here, in Ethiopia. The second body is put into the same body bag. They have such few resources, but are determined to maintain a certain dignity. They're buried near the river in a shallow grave, in hope that one day they will be exhumed and reburied in their homeland. For now, though, there are only 2 shovels and a pick. Others join in, pushing the earth with their bare hands. Laid to rest on unconsecrated ground, the Christian Tigrayans desperately try to give respect to their dead, marking the grave with a makeshift cross held together with a single face mask. A new dawn rises. Witnesses and local authorities tell us it brings with it 11 new bodies. For months now, we have been investigating atrocities committed by Ethiopian and allied forces in Tigray. It's clear to us this marks a new chapter in the ethnic cleansing of the region. But here in Sudan, there are survivors.
Alfen.
The living speaking on behalf of the dead. Escapees, eyewitnesses from the Ethiopian border town of Humera, describe to us a renewed campaign of mass incarcerations and executions.
The numbers that they're telling us are extraordinary. We're talking about possibly over 10,000 people detained just for being Tigrayan, they say.
We begin to piece together the puzzle. We are here in Sudan and Wad al-Hilaw. Upstream in Ethiopia is Humera.
Based on descriptions from multiple escaped detainees, Humera and its surroundings have become a mass detention facility. We were able to pinpoint the locations. Andaya Tabarak, a storage facility. The electric goods warehouse Naked and Mibrat Haili, where electric wire is stored. Bet Hinsat, the old prison. And Aguna, the sesame warehouse. The list goes on. Via eyewitness testimony and satellite imagery, we verified the existence of at least 7 mass detention facilities in Humera, where torture is rampant, and 2 outside town, including a military camp and the Hawaja. These are pictures of Tigrayan victims, husbands, fathers, sons. Many show victims restrained using the same small-gauge yellow electrical wire identified by eyewitnesses as having been stored in the electric goods warehouse in Humera. CNN spoke to multiple eyewitnesses and international and local forensic experts. Most of the victims were tortured, executed, piled on top of each other, most likely in a facility or a mass grave, before ending up in the river. After examining the bodies, experts were able to pinpoint one of the techniques used. Victims had their arms tied back at the elbows in an excruciatingly painful.
Maybe nothing's certain except death and taxes, but we're certain this episode ain't about taxes. At 88, Shotzi Weisberger recently staged her own funeral.
A funeral is a funeral while I was still alive.
Charles Lucas, who's 3 years shy of a century, has buried 2 wives. Same cemetery, same plot.
They were close, as friends.
But he bought long before the neighborhood got gentrified.
The price ranges from $4,500 all the way up to $19,880.
This man is still young. So why did he create an app that reminds us 5 times a day that we're gonna die?
It's very natural to want to forget that you're going to die. Don't do it. It's very dangerous.
This week, New Yorkers staying positive about the inevitable.
People are dying who never died before. That is a truism. But one thing that is not so self-evident as to be hardly worth mentioning is the way our attitudes about death have shifted. Time was when 6 feet of dirt and a pine box was all anyone could count on as they moved toward the eternal exit sign. But in this metropolis, with its ever-expanding global citizenry, the birthright of death rights has changed. And there are as many options for a send-off as there are custom combinations for the fine wares here in this showroom, where Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, they help people navigate engraving, lining, and generally selecting funeral caskets. But caskets are only one of the ways to go on your way out. In her New York Times bestseller, From Here to Eternity, Caitlin Doty downloads the death rituals of disparate cultures, from a public funeral pyre in Colorado to Indonesia, where a tolling bell announces the start of the Ma Nene, an event held every 3 years where families dig up and dress their deceased loved ones in new clothes to honor their ancestors. Freshly dressed, they stunt for the gram, then go back into their freshly cleaned caskets until the next costume change 3 years later. Now, before you say gross, ask yourself, when was the last time you stopped in on Grandma or visited that great uncle of yours in Queens? Show me the manner in which a nation or community cares for its dead, and I will measure with mathematical exactness the tender sympathies of its people, their respect for the laws of the land, and their loyalty to high ideals. Or so thought British Prime Minister William Gladstone. But one man's cremation is another person's barbecue and pawpaw. So we ask that you keep an open mind as we go in on death.
The past 100 years or so, we don't even see people who are dying. People die in hospitals. It used to be people died at home. Now it's more of a mystery and associated with hospitals and pain.
Isn't death painful, though?
Dying is not painful. Disease is painful. My name is Schatzi. When I was younger, people called me Schatzi. I did not like it. Schatzi in German means sweetheart, and in Yiddish it means little treasure. And I didn't like it when I was younger.
Schatzi, Schatzi, I call you Schatzi 'cause I love you so.
I was born in Brooklyn in 1930. I'm 88 years old. It's interesting to grow old. Sometimes it feels very bizarre. I'm 88 years old. How could that be? How did that happen? Other times I feel like, oh my God, I'm so old. I was a registered nurse for 47 years. In nursing, the two things that interested me the most was coming into the world and leaving the world. I went through a whole process of being afraid of dying, just like most people. I had a funeral about 5 months ago. A funeral is a funeral while I was still alive. And the reason I decided to do that is because I wanted to share with people my process of what I went through and to help people to recognize that you can talk about death and dying and you can study it. And it was written up in the New York Times and I've become somewhat of a celebrity. People said they had a lot of fun. I had a full-size cardboard biodegradable coffin that people decorated. I had markers and glitter and pictures. I sing with the Brooklyn Women's Chorus, and the chorus came and we sang a bunch of songs and people loved it. My favorite song of all is over 100 years old. It's called Hard Times. People have always been afraid of death, of the unknown. I've been having a death cafe for over a year now, and a death cafe is a group of people coming together and talking about death and dying. And it started in Europe. Now there are hundreds all over the world.
Because we do know that we will all have an end of life. We just don't know when and how that will appear. And I don't tell you you need to believe in this.
I deviated a little bit because the traditional one is that there is no agenda, but I would start my death cafe with an agenda. Let's talk about doctor-assisted suicide. Let's talk about whatever. To me, the work that needs to be done is early work. People, when they're younger, coming together, whether at death cafes or whatever, and becoming more familiar, feeling more comfortable with the prospect of dying. The body knows how to die. But when you bombard it with all that stuff, you mess it up. So it doesn't just die, it gets dragged out, so that the dying process is dragged out and the suffering is dragged out. Doctors don't explain that to people, and people want to live longer.
You don't know whose hands you're going to end up in, even for a little while. Is scary.
When I die,
Do you mind if I ask how you would like to die?
I have very strong feelings of how I would like to die. I wish I could control it. I know I can't, but what I would like is to die here in my bed, to be in my bed, and to know I'm dying, not to die of a heart attack or, to suddenly. I want to be able, I'm so curious about it. I want to experience the dying process. And I want to have time for my friends to come and say goodbye. And I have a bequeath list. If you notice, all the things have little tags on them with people's names. So people have selected what they like of my stuff because I'm very attached to my stuff. So I want them to go to happy homes where people will take good care of them. And when I actually do die, when I die, I'm going to be in a gown that I just bought a few days ago, a very pretty cotton white gown. And then I'm going to be wrapped in a shroud, and all cotton. It's a tablecloth, actually. It's beautiful. And that's going to be my shroud. I'm going to be buried in the woods, and I feel so much better than what I originally was going to be cremated. My body will deteriorate, and it will nourish the soil, and something will grow. Grass, a tree maybe, flowers maybe. My body is just so precious at this point, and it's going to bring life. That really helped me to change my attitude towards death and dying enormously. I feel like I'm really educating people, and that feels very good. I'm very passionate about helping people become more comfortable with the whole process.
So thank you all for coming.
Thank you for coming.
When is the next one? It is
Dying is not the end of life, it's the fulfillment of life. I suspect I'm going to be sad because I don't want to die. I have too much to do, and life is too interesting, so I'd rather not die, but so I'll be sad, and I'll probably be angry that I'm dying, and I'll probably be afraid. I think I'll go through all those emotions, but hopefully I'll reach a point of acceptance and tranquility.
So this is your wall of fame over here.
So basically, the Wall of Fame just has pictures of employees, but the key to this whole Wall of Fame is this biggest casket we ever made. They made in the early 90s, late 80s. This was a 1,000-pound man that they built the casket for. It's about the size of a king-size mattress.
That's a custom job.
Custom-made casket. And it weighed, I think, close to 500 pounds, just the casket alone, or 400 pounds like that.
It is as wide as a king-size mattress.
King-size mattress.
Do you have a withered hand? A hand that cannot grope or hold? Do you have a withered hand? A hand that's weak instead of bold? How long have you been this way? Trying to decide when to take a stand. Knowing your weakness every day because you have a withered hand. She had said to me once, I'm going to go before you. You're going to live to be 100. I said, stop it. Virginia Dare Martin was my first wife. We were married in 1954. Had two beautiful daughters. She lived in Brooklyn, and I commuted from Connecticut, from Bridgeport to Brooklyn with the romance. The marriage took place in Brooklyn. The church is on Stuyvesant Avenue. She passed in 60. Having been traumatized by death, especially death of the wife, I had to start asking questions. What do I do? Well, I didn't know anything about cemeteries, so I saw the undertaker. And he mentioned Evergreen. They took a look at Evergreen, said, okay. And they started talking about various spots. And they said, Beacon Hill. And that just kind of hit me right, Beacon Hill. So, Beacon Hill, okay. And I don't recall what the actual cost was, but I think the cost was under $500 at the time. And of course, 3 times that now.
I'm aware that people have a taboo about death. So a lot of people don't understand what's going on. It's their first time. It's a lot of information to absorb. So I just try to get them into a tranquil space where they're relaxed. This way they're absorbing what I'm telling them. I think we do north of 2,000 burials a year here, and we still have availability. I have kids that are 6 years old and younger. Not in their lifetime, there will still be spaces available here. There's so many areas that are undeveloped, and there's areas that we developed that we haven't even opened yet. We have reclamation lots. Basically, you have to have an inactive area for 75 years plus. What we do then is we try to locate a living relative, any family that is associated with that area. Be that we can't find them, that a state gets it, they're the ones that release it back to us. The price ranges from 1 deep graves, $4,500, all the way up to $19,880, depending on where